Racist cop stops elderly black man, unknowingly arresting a Supreme Court justice. Imagine you're driving down a familiar road. Everything seems normal, and you have no idea that in just a few minutes, a traffic stop will change your life forever. That night, Malcolm Carter, 72, one of the senior judges of the U.S. Supreme Court, was driving his luxurious Mercedes back from an important lecture. It should have been just another ordinary evening. But no, everything changed the moment his car was signaled to stop by the police. As the flashing red and blue lights from the police car illuminated his rearview mirror, a familiar feeling rose within him, the fear that any black man in America would understand. Even though he had done nothing wrong, had no violations, he knew that in the eyes of the officer behind him, there was only one thing: he was being judged for the color of his skin. And in that moment, a bombshell secret was revealed, shaking the very foundation of the nation's legal system. What do you think will happen next? How do you think Judge Carter will handle the police officer? Will justice truly be blind? Or is it reserved only for those with power and status? Before we dive into this gripping story, leave a comment below this video. We'd love to know where you are and what time it is right now. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you want to witness an unexpected ending. The story you're about to hear isn't just a confrontation between a judge and a police officer. It will immerse you in a dark world of racism, power, and secrets that many of us would prefer to ignore. Let's begin the story. The story we're about to explore starts on a late afternoon when a police officer named James Turner makes a routine traffic stop. This might seem like just another ordinary task for a police officer, but in reality it hides a complex and heartbreaking tale. When Officer Turner asked the driver to pull over, he had no idea that the man behind the wheel, Malcolm Carter, 72, was not an ordinary man. Malcolm Carter was not just a driver or a stranger rushing on the street. He was a U.S. Supreme Court justice, one of the leaders of the nation's legal system. He was well known for his fair rulings, his steadfast fight against racial discrimination, and his dedication to defending the rights of the marginalized. It was at that moment when Officer Turner, unaware of who he was facing, saw an older black man driving a luxurious car, an image that in the minds of many, especially in small neighborhoods and towns like Millfield, was often linked to suspicion. Malcolm Carter's skin color, his expensive car, all of these things caused Officer Turner to become doubtful. And from that suspicion, his next actions led to a confrontation that was not simply between a police officer and a citizen. It was a confrontation between a justice system tainted with racial prejudice and those who stood to defend fairness despite all challenges. This incident didn't stop at being a personal matter. It opened up a bigger story, one that exposes issues we can no longer ignore. Racism, manipulation within the police and legal systems. Traffic stops like this aren't rare, and Malcolm Carter's story is just one of countless cases that people, especially the black community, face every day. The big question we must ask here is, does justice truly remain blind, as we often believe, or does it first see skin color before seeing the truth? How can a legal system that is meant to protect fairness still have loopholes that allow racism and the abuse of power to flourish? And this is the beginning of the journey we're about to explore together. A journey to understand more about how the core values of justice are being tested within the very system we trust. So what will happen next? Let's continue to uncover it together. What happened to Judge Malcolm Carter isn't an isolated event in recent American history. It's not the only story of racial discrimination within the police system. This issue has been long-standing and is growing more serious, tied to cases we've all heard about. Names that anyone living in America cannot forget: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others. Each of these incidents is not just the story of individual victims, but also powerful wake-up calls about a system that continues to perpetuate deep injustices. The story of Malcolm Carter, a U.S. Supreme Court justice, during his traffic stop with Officer James Turner, though it might seem like a personal incident, is part of the bigger picture of racial discrimination within the U.S. police system. This is an issue that anti-racism protests have been rallying against for years. But Carter's incident makes us question, why does this issue still exist in modern society, where people seem to have become more aware of what's going on? While George Floyd was killed by a police officer during an arrest, Breonna Taylor's case is a story of excessive use of power in a raid on her home. Both of these incidents are historical landmarks of racial discrimination filmed and widely shared on social media, making it impossible to ignore the truth that a large portion of the police force still treats Black people unjustly. Questions about accountability, fairness in police conduct, and how the system protects wrongful actions remain with no clear answers. Looking back in history, protests like Black Lives Matter are not merely calls for justice in cases of murder, but are a powerful demand for comprehensive police reform, especially in traffic stops, an action that seems simple but is fraught with potential issues. A report from the U.S. Department of Justice indicates that Black people are 1.5 times more likely to be pulled over than white people, even though there is no obvious difference in driving behavior. Furthermore, Black people face unreasonable vehicle and body searches without justifiable reasons. When we look at the case of Judge Malcolm Carter, the prominent issue is the unfair treatment. Officer Turner, as soon as he saw a Black man driving a luxury car, did not check his background or consider any possibilities other than assuming that this might be a criminal act. Why? Because in this society, the image of a Black man driving an expensive car is not something that seems normal to some people. They are judged by their skin color, by prejudices deeply embedded in society, making it difficult for them to be seen fairly. Looking back at incidents like Floyd and Taylor, these are not just examples of racial discrimination in the police force, but also serve to highlight the helplessness of the legal system when confronting this issue. Why can't people treat Black individuals fairly even if they are ordinary citizens, or as in the case of Malcolm Carter, a Supreme Court justice? This is a question that, despite protests and calls for change, still doesn't have a clear answer. Empirical studies on racism within the police system have revealed something crucial. The system doesn't just have problems with individual officers' misconduct, but also in its protection and maintenance of a system that allows such actions to exist. Most law enforcement agencies lack adequate oversight mechanisms to prevent internal racial discrimination. Police forces sometimes create an invisible protective wall for offending colleagues, making the pursuit of justice difficult. We can see this clearly in Malcolm Carter's case. Officer Turner not only acted wrongly, but the police system failed to quickly implement proper corrective measures. Not to mention the investigations and the silence of some people, particularly those in higher positions of power. That is why these incidents keep repeating, causing citizens, especially Black people, to continue living in fear and unease. But the story doesn't just end with exposing the mistakes of the police. These incidents are also lessons in the resilience of individuals like Malcolm Carter and many others who have fought for a justice system that truly embodies fairness. Protests, anti-racism campaigns are not in vain. And thanks to events like these, systemic issues are exposed and deep reform has been set into motion. The story of Malcolm Carter, like other incidents, reminds us that change doesn't come from one trial, but through an ongoing struggle. The journey to justice may be long, but every small step contributes to building a fairer future. On that day when Officer James Turner signaled for the stop and faced 72-year-old Judge Malcolm Carter, he had no idea he was facing a U.S. Supreme Court justice, a man who had fought relentlessly for justice and against racial discrimination throughout his career. Officer Turner only saw the surface, a Black man driving a Mercedes, and in his view, this didn't make sense. But why was that the case? Why did a police officer act this way based on assumptions and prejudices that he didn't even recognize? Racial prejudice is not a new issue in the U.S. police system. But what's concerning is that not everyone is aware of the deep-seated nature of this problem. These prejudices exist not just in the minds of individuals, but have also been ingrained in the system, making racial discrimination a part of how police and law enforcement agencies operate on a daily basis. Officers like James Turner, even though they may not intentionally discriminate, have been nurtured in a social system where Black people are often viewed with suspicion. A luxury car being driven by a Black man for Turner could simply be a sign of criminal behavior without any clear evidence. This is a typical example of how racial prejudices and discrimination can influence police decisions. Instead of approaching the situation with an open mind to assess it fairly, they are driven by surface-level images and the assumption that Black people might not deserve to own luxury things. These judgments are not a new phenomenon. We have witnessed similar cases in the past arrests where a person was treated as a criminal just because of their skin color. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless other victims are clear examples of how racial prejudice influences police behavior. Even these incidents have forced us to reconsider how the police interact with Black communities. However, what makes us reflect is how an officer like James Turner could act this way without realizing that he was violating a citizen's rights. He didn't recognize that his actions were not only a personal mistake, but also part of a bigger issue. Why didn't he stop to check information, to think more deeply about the person he was facing? Surely if he had realized Malcolm Carter was a Supreme Court justice, he would have handled the situation completely differently. But the question is, why did Officer Turner continue to act this way even without knowing who Malcolm Carter was? The reason is that he was guided by unconscious prejudices, thoughts he didn't realize existed in his mind. We all have unconscious biases, thoughts we cannot control or be aware of. But in the case of police officers, these biases are not just individual issues, but part of the system. Studies have shown that when police interact with a Black person, they tend to react more strongly, easily, assuming the person is committing a crime, even when there's no clear evidence. This issue is exacerbated when police officers aren't trained to be aware of their unconscious biases and when they don't understand the impact of these biases on their actions. A crucial lesson we can draw from this story is the importance of focusing on educating and training police officers about racial awareness. Without training that helps officers recognize their unconscious biases, they will continue to act on false assumptions, leading to serious mistakes. This not only affects those who are subjected to racial discrimination, but also impacts the police force itself as they face false accusations and justice is not served. The current police system not only fails to identify and address racial biases, but also lacks a strong oversight and inspection system. Most police agencies do not have effective processes to ensure that all officers are uniformly and properly trained on how to treat all citizens, regardless of their race or social status. A report from the Department of Justice shows that the majority of racial discrimination cases in the police force are not properly handled. Many officers still do not fully understand the impact of racial biases and how these biases affect their behavior. This raises a significant question about police reform and training. Officers need to be trained not only in professional skills, but also in how to recognize and deal with racial discrimination. This training should include helping officers understand that hasty judgments based on surface impressions can lead to serious consequences. Only when there is a change in the way training is conducted and the behavior of officers is monitored can the system truly create a fairer environment for all citizens. So what is the major lesson here? It is that we need to build a more accountable and transparent police system where wrongful actions are not protected and where officers are held accountable for their actions. We cannot continue allowing unconscious biases to determine the fate of innocent people. Judge Malcolm Carter's story is a powerful reminder that we cannot allow the system to continue as it is. If we want to see change, it must begin with understanding the motivations and psychology of police officers, recognizing and changing their unconscious biases, and ultimately changing the way police training and supervision are conducted. Otherwise, stories like Judge Carter's will continue to happen, and true justice will remain a dream. On that day, 72-year-old Judge Malcolm Carter, one of the brightest figures in the Supreme Court, faced a situation that no one could have anticipated. He, a symbol of justice, fairness, and a protector of minority rights for many decades, was disregarded by a young officer like James Turner simply because of the color of his skin. An event that seemed ordinary reflected a much larger issue within the U.S. legal system: racial discrimination even in the most powerful institutions. Judge Carter had led an impressive life. He overcame many challenges, from being a boy growing up in a poor neighborhood to becoming one of the most distinguished judges of the U.S. Supreme Court. With fair rulings and actions to protect the rights of minority groups, he is a source of pride not only for the Black community, but also for the American legal system. However, despite being a judge with important rulings and outstanding achievements, racial discrimination still did not spare him. His story is not only a personal tale, but a reminder of a painful reality. Despite success and a high position in society, a Black person can still become a victim of racial discrimination, especially when faced with the biases of others. Even as the head of a court, a respected judge, he could not escape the prejudiced stares from those who did not understand him. This forces us to ask, how can racial discrimination exist even at the highest levels of the legal system? How can people like Judge Carter, individuals who are supposed to represent justice, become the targets of such deep-seated societal biases? Racial discrimination in the legal system is not a new issue. While there are no longer any overtly racist laws, the biases and discriminatory mindsets still exist in the subconscious of many people, including those in positions of power. Incidents like Judge Carter's or other situations involving Black lawyers or judges are not isolated. In fact, they serve as evidence of a larger problem. Racial discrimination does not only happen among those with little power, but also exists within the very legal system where justice should be equal for everyone. Judges, lawyers, and legal professionals are always considered to be individuals with significant influence in society. But even when they are at the peak of their careers, they still face discrimination. Individuals like Judge Carter could never have imagined that one day racial discrimination could make them the target of prejudice, even when they are on their way home in a luxury car that they worked hard to own. Take the example of Judge Thurgood Marshall, the first Black person appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Although he was one of the key figures in helping address racial discrimination in the U.S., he could not escape situations where he was discriminated against simply because of his skin color. One of the most memorable events was when he had to confront police officers in a public place where he had to prove he was a Supreme Court justice just to escape the unwarranted suspicion of law enforcement officers. This story, though painful, is a clear example that no matter how powerful, famous, or high-ranking a person is, racial discrimination can still occur. The system cannot change on its own without intervention and deep awareness of this issue from those directly involved, from people like Judge Carter, who did not hesitate to use his power to fight for justice, even when he himself became a victim of it. Why are powerful individuals like Judge Carter discriminated against? A major question we need to answer is, why do people like Judge Carter, who have risen from poverty and achieved significant success, still face racial discrimination? The answer lies in the deep-seated prejudices in society, a part of a long-standing culture that has embedded itself in people's subconscious, not only in lower social classes, but even in the highest ones. Despite Judge Carter's outstanding achievements and strong educational background in the eyes of Officer James Turner, he was just a Black man driving a luxury car. Judge Carter, with everything he had achieved, was still seen as the other simply because of his skin color. This is not just Judge Carter's story. It is the story of millions of other Black individuals who, no matter how successful they become, still cannot escape racial discrimination because of their outward appearance. This is a serious issue, especially when we talk about justice and equality in society. Those in positions of power, whether judges, professors, or leaders, can still become targets of prejudices and discrimination. And this raises a major question about the fairness of the system. What is the small lesson from this story? It is that fairness cannot be based solely on what we achieve or our personal accomplishments. Justice must be equally applied to everyone regardless of their position or power. Each of us, from ordinary people to those at the top of the system, must face the same challenges in fighting racial discrimination. Judge Carter's story is a powerful reminder that justice cannot be blind to anyone. It must always view people based on their actions and character, not their skin color, appearance, or social status. Only then can the legal system truly enforce justice for all. On that day, Judge Malcolm Carter made a controversial decision, but one that was more profound than anyone could have imagined. When stopped and detained by Officer James Turner, he chose not to reveal his identity immediately. A decision that was not simple. In a moment of being offended and treated unjustly, Judge Carter did not choose to calm the situation by revealing his identity and power. Instead, he chose to experience what millions of Black people face every day: suspicion and unfair treatment simply because of their skin color. Why did Judge Carter decide not to reveal his identity immediately? This is an important question that we need to examine more closely. For someone with such a high position, revealing his identity would have been an easy step to resolve the situation quickly. But that was not Judge Carter's purpose. His decision not to reveal his identity was a deliberate experiment, a way for him to truly feel what the Black community faces regularly. It was not just a personal act, but an educational decision to show that racial discrimination does not only exist in public or obvious situations, but it permeates every corner of society. Imagine Judge Carter is a 72-year-old man who has spent decades fighting for justice, and with his outstanding career, he does not need to prove who he is. However, he still decided not to disclose his identity when stopped by the police, even though he knew that this could complicate the situation further. For him, this act was not just to experience the challenges Black people face, but also to remind others of a reality that anyone without power or status can easily fall into. Racial discrimination can happen to anyone regardless of their talent, education, or fame. Judge Carter's decision provides a significant lesson in empathy and awareness. By choosing not to reveal his identity, he did not simply experience the feelings that Black people in society endure, but he truly felt the absurdity of being considered different simply because of his skin color. Allowing himself to be placed in the shoes of ordinary, powerless people helped him realize an important truth: individuals like him, despite their success, still cannot escape the racial discrimination that ordinary people, particularly people of color, face every day. This story serves as a reminder of the power of empathy. Sometimes, in order to truly understand the injustices others face, we must stand in their shoes, not just look down from above. Judge Carter could have disclosed his identity and demanded respect immediately, but instead he chose to become a part of the struggle that millions of Black people are fighting. And from that, he gained even more motivation to protect justice, not just for people in power like himself, but for everyone suffering from discrimination. This empathy is not just a personal lesson, but a lesson for society as a whole. We cannot change what we do not understand. To fight for justice, we need to fully understand what is happening around us, especially for vulnerable groups. To better understand racial discrimination, we need to experience it not just through books or reports, but through real-life moments, whether in everyday life or in unexpected situations. In this story, beyond Judge Carter's decision not to reveal his identity, we also need to consider the reaction of Officer James Turner. His failure to recognize his actions and allowing biases to guide his decisions was a clear mistake. The officer treated Judge Carter solely based on his skin color, without considering the situation or the truth about the person he was detaining. This is a common mistake in cases involving police officers and racial discrimination. We often hear about cases where police officers make incorrect decisions due to a lack of understanding of the diversity within the community, or sometimes because of deep-seated biases they are unaware of. The truth is, many police officers are not adequately trained in diversity and racial issues, and this leads to inappropriate behaviors when they interact with communities, especially those with different skin colors. They may not realize that their reactions can harm others, and may not understand that such actions not only violate citizens' rights, but also undermine the community's trust in the legal system. What lesson can law enforcement take from this? It is that respecting citizens' rights and dignity should not be a matter of consideration. It is the basic duty of every police officer, not only in tense situations, but also in every daily interaction with the public. Ensuring fairness in traffic stops or arrests and not allowing biases or racial prejudice to influence actions is essential to maintaining respect and trust within the community. However, this story goes beyond individual mistakes or the empathy of one person. The issue of racial discrimination in the U.S. police and legal system is much deeper. This event is just one piece of the larger picture of systemic injustices that have lasted for generations. So how can we change this? Can incidents like this help push for reform, or will we once again overlook the issues that need to be addressed? To better understand, we must analyze the necessary changes in the U.S. police system and the actions needed to improve this situation. We all know that every system has organizations or associations that protect the interests of its members. In the U.S., police system organizations like the BPC, Brave Police Coalition, and TPG, the protectors of tradition, were created with the purpose of defending police officers' rights, helping them do their jobs without excessive hindrance. However, what many people don't realize is that these organizations, despite being formed to protect the police, have gradually become part of a system that manipulates, protects wrongful actions, and conceals misconduct within the police force. The BPC and TPG are powerful police advocacy organizations in the U.S. founded in the early 2000s. Their original purpose was to support the police in facing false accusations and protect them from harsh working conditions, while also defending their rights in legal cases. But over time, these organizations have not only protected police officers, but also started to participate in campaigns attacking individuals or organizations that want to expose the officers' wrongdoings. We've likely heard of cases where police officers were accused of misconduct, but these organizations intervened to reduce the consequences for the officers involved. These organizations not only do everything to protect the officers, but also create strong media campaigns to reverse public opinion and attack the victims of these wrongful actions. As a result, the issue of racial discrimination and police abuse of power cannot be fully addressed because these protective organizations are helping conceal the dark truths of the police system. BPC and TPG have developed sophisticated strategies to protect police officers, not only in lawsuits, but also in shaping public opinion. One of the key tactics these organizations use is media. When an incident involving police misconduct arises, they do not simply provide reasonable justifications to defend the officer's actions, but also attempt to manipulate public opinion by releasing information favorable to the police. For example, they try to report an incident in a way that makes the public feel more sympathetic towards the police than the victim. Another tactic used by these organizations is to organize public campaigns to undermine or attack the victims of police actions. They may tarnish the victim's image through unsupported stories or distortions of the truth, thereby diminishing public sympathy for the victim. In the case of Judge Carter, a similar campaign could be launched by these organizations, aiming to skew public opinion and make his story lose its fairness in the eyes of the public. These organizations do not stop at public campaigns. They also exert strong influence on investigations and create protective walls for officers involved in misconduct. Reports on cases like Judge Carter's are often altered or concealed as these organizations use their influence to prevent investigations from reaching fair conclusions. This is the issue that causes many police cases to never be properly addressed, and citizens cannot find true justice. To better understand the influence of these organizations, we can look at past incidents such as the cases of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, where police protection organizations intervened to mitigate the consequences for the involved officers. In these cases, police advocacy groups not only defended the officers, but also launched campaigns attacking the victims, especially when those victims were Black, like Judge Carter. We can also see this in the case of Eric Garner, a Black man who was choked to death by police on the streets of New York. After his death, police advocacy groups not only failed to condemn the officer's wrongful actions, but also presented arguments to protect the police, stating that law enforcement officers always face dangerous situations and their actions were merely self-defense. From these examples, we can see that excessive interference from police advocacy organizations is distorting justice. These cases prove that police protection organizations are making the U.S. police system less transparent and harder to hold accountable. It is this interference that creates a series of injustices not only against the victims, but also against the officers who genuinely want to work fairly. The biggest lesson we can draw from the interference of organizations like BPC and TPG is this: justice can only exist when it is executed transparently and fairly. Instead of supporting justice, these organizations have skewed the system, making it uncontrollable. Protecting wrongful officers not only weakens public trust in the legal system, but also ends any chance of reforming the system. So this leads us to an important question. How can we change this system? How can justice truly be applied to everyone, regardless of skin color or social status? To answer this question, we need to understand the deep consequences of racial discrimination within the legal system, and we must know where to begin in creating a truly fair system that protects all citizens. The answer will be presented in the next part of this story. When Judge Malcolm Carter was treated unfairly during a police traffic stop, it was not just his story. This incident woke up people in the shadows, those who are willing to stand up and face power. In this struggle, Gabriella Carter, Judge Carter's wife, showed resilience and determination not to give up in her search for the truth. Gabriella's story is a journey not only of love, but also of justice. And in people like her, we find a model of courage in fighting against injustice. Gabriella Carter, an experienced lawyer, was no ordinary woman. When her husband, Judge Carter, was treated unfairly, even though he was a symbol of justice, Gabriella did not back down. When she witnessed the absurdity and outrage of justice being defeated merely because of her husband's skin color, she knew she had to act. However, Gabriella's struggle was not easy. She not only had to face obstacles from those within the legal system, but also had to fight against societal opposition and powerful organizations protecting the police. Gabriella, although the woman behind a Supreme Court justice, understood that the enforcement of justice sometimes depends on those who dare to stand up, despite facing threats and hardships. She began her journey by seeking the truth, exposing the darker sides of the U.S. police and legal system. Gabriella was not just the wife of Judge Carter. She was a warrior in the fight for justice, someone who witnessed the injustice happening to her own family. But instead of withdrawing, she took the struggle to a new level. She knew that what mattered was not personal revenge, but how to bring the hidden truths to light. Every step she took was full of challenges, and every decision was made with sweat and tears, but Gabriella remained determined to continue. However, Gabriella was not alone in this fight. Officer Kevin Matthews and Sarah Mitchell, her companions, were also key figures in uncovering the truth. Officer Kevin Matthews, a police officer who had witnessed the injustice of his colleagues, could no longer stand by while he saw wrongdoings go unpunished. Despite the danger to his career, he decided to stand up and testify to the truth. He understood that justice cannot be upheld if those in power do not take responsibility for their actions. Sarah Mitchell, who recorded the footage of Judge Carter being mistreated, also became an important witness in the case. She not only captured the truth on her phone, but also had to face risks and threats. After the incident, Sarah was attacked and faced retaliation, but she did not back down. Her stand proved that justice is not always protected by the system, but sometimes it comes from those who dare to challenge the powers trying to protect their authority. Through the actions of Gabriella, Kevin, and Sarah, we learn that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to face fear and act despite it. All three faced threats, pressure, and difficulties from police protection organizations and individuals within the legal system, but they did not give up. We also need to recognize that their struggle was not just about personal interests, but a fight for fairness in society. They were not only going against individuals, but also the system, a system that had long shielded wrongful actions. They were pioneers in exposing the truth, knowing that doing so would disrupt their lives and put them at risk. But they understood that change cannot happen without people who dare to stand up, fight, and demand justice. In the current social context of the U.S., the lesson of courage is more important than ever. The reality shows that those with power, or those who dare to stand against large forces, often face resistance not only from the system, but also from those around them. But this only reaffirms that justice truly matters when it is protected and upheld by people willing to stand up for the truth. So how did people like Gabriella, Kevin, and Sarah face these challenges? How did their courage influence the system that protects wrongful police officers? And can real change happen when a power structure like this has become so deeply embedded in society? These questions will be answered in the next part of this story. In every fight for justice, there is one factor that cannot be ignored: the manipulation by political organizations, those hidden in the shadows, but with deep influence on the legal system and the police. In the case of Judge Carter, intervention of extremist organizations such as BPC, Brave Police Coalition, and TPG, the Protectors of Tradition, not only changed the way justice was carried out, but also affected major decisions in the U.S. Supreme Court and national police policies. From this, a major question arises: can the legal system maintain justice when these powerful forces continue to control critical decisions? Organizations like BPC and TPG are not only groups that protect the rights of police officers, but they also have significant influence on cases and decisions within the legal system. They constantly work to manipulate public opinion, gain support from the public, and even from senior officials. These organizations use various means, from media publicity campaigns to recruiting prominent judges and lawyers in society, to create an influence that benefits their goals. For Judge Carter, this incident was not just a case of police error, but a reflection of an underground battle between forces protecting the police and those fighting for truth and justice. The police protection system, along with the manipulation by organizations like BPC and TPG, clearly demonstrated the injustice and contradictions in how justice is implemented. Not only are investigations influenced, but even verdicts in significant cases are shaped by these powerful forces, skewing the fairness we trust in. To understand more about the impact of political manipulation, we can compare Judge Carter's case with historical events that have occurred. One notable example is the cases involving the rights of the Black community over many decades, such as the Brown versus Board of Education case, the Rodney King case, and more recently, the George Floyd case. In these cases, the intervention of politics and powerful organizations distorted the truth and obstructed justice. For instance, in George Floyd's case, not only did organizations protecting police power intervene, but political forces also sought to defend members of the police force. In situations like this interference affects not only decisions in court, but also creates an environment where those in power can avoid punishment, while the more vulnerable are subjected to disdain and discrimination. Political manipulation is also present in the decisions regarding police protection laws. These policies not only create a system that shields police officers from personal responsibility, but also allow them to act without fear of accountability. This results in a state of impunity for police misconduct, leading to more heartbreaking cases similar to what Judge Carter experienced. Why does the legal system protect criminals? This is a question many people continuously ask when witnessing investigations into police abuse of power and the manipulation by powerful organizations. These investigations are often lacking transparency and sometimes distorted by influential forces within the system. Judge Carter's case is a clear example of the lack of transparency in investigations. Initially, the police did not acknowledge the wrongdoing of Officer James Turner, and the legal system almost entirely protected him. The information about the incident was controlled, and even the video recording of the incident was hidden. This is not an isolated incident, but a larger problem within the system where wrongdoers can continue to live comfortably under the protection of powerful organizations. So how can we create a truly fair justice system for everyone? The answer is not simple. It requires deep reforms in how the legal system operates, especially in ensuring transparency in investigations. When the system can no longer protect criminals, but instead protects justice and truth, only then can justice truly be served. A key lesson we can draw from these incidents is the necessity to fight for transparency and fairness in the legal system. Real change cannot happen without the courage to stand up, speak the truth, and change the wrongs within the system. As Gabriella Carter did, and as many others have done in the past, this struggle is not easy. But if we do not act, this system will continue to manipulate and protect its own mistakes. Political manipulation is not a new phenomenon, but when it is exposed, important changes can happen. Facing these forces is not just an individual struggle, but a struggle for society as a whole, where justice will no longer be dictated by prejudice and hidden powers. So with systems still influenced by this manipulation, how can we create real change? The answer is not simple, and surely this journey is still long. But the lessons from people like Gabriella Carter and other courageous individuals will always be an inspiration for those who want to change the world, no matter the challenges. The next part of the story will continue to explore those who stand against the system and how they continue to make a profound impact in the fight for justice. The fight for justice, which we are following through Judge Carter's story and Officer James Turner, is not just a personal lesson, but a pivotal moment for society as a whole. These events not only expose deep racial discrimination within the police force, but also push for critical reforms in the U.S. legal system and police force. This presents a rare opportunity to review current policies, highlight issues of injustice, and search for real solutions for a fairer society. Judge Carter's story, from being mistreated by the police to the truth being exposed, highlights the need for reform within both the legal system and the police force. This case has not only remained a personal incident, but has become a symbol of the injustices that the Black community faces in American society. From this, dialogues about reform have become a significant concern, not only in the community, but also within the government and regulatory bodies. One of the key reforms that this case has promoted is the change in the police immunity policy. Previously, law enforcement officers had immunity for many of their actions, while performing their duties, especially during arrests or use of force. However, when Judge Carter's case exploded and was brought to light, the misconduct of the police became an issue that society could no longer ignore. Changes in the police immunity policy are now being discussed. Surveys show that a large portion of the American public supports holding police officers accountable when they violate citizens' human rights, particularly against minority groups. Additionally, the police force needs to change its training and conduct. The current police training system sometimes falls short in teaching officers about racial awareness and cultural diversity. Without training on social justice, racial justice, and how to treat all citizens equally, officers like James Turner will continue to perpetuate racism and injustice in their work. This requires authorities to overhaul police training at the roots with a comprehensive program that encourages empathy and understanding of the struggles faced by the Black community. Judge Carter's case is not only a significant legal event, but has also changed the public's view on racial discrimination in American society. When videos showing Judge Carter being mistreated were spread through the media, a wave of outrage quickly rose. Protests and movements demanding justice erupted in major cities from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. Protesters, many of whom were white, stood alongside Black people, continuously calling for justice for all, regardless of race or social status. One important outcome of this case is the increased public awareness of racial discrimination in the police and legal systems. The protests and movements did not just demand justice for Judge Carter, but also called for comprehensive reform of the U.S. legal system. The Black Lives Matter movement, along with other social organizations, has played a significant role in pushing for policy reforms and social justice in the U.S. The media also played an essential role in exposing the truth and making racial discrimination a prominent topic in political and social debates. Looking at the changes that have occurred following Judge Carter's case, we can see several important impacts these events may have on long-term policies in the U.S. First, the case made many legal bodies and political organizations realize that the police can no longer be unconditionally protected in every situation. Holding police officers accountable for their wrongdoings will be a major turning point in building a fairer and more transparent legal system. Additionally, these reforms may help rebuild public trust in the police force, allowing them to carry out their duties to protect the community with integrity and without discrimination. Furthermore, Judge Carter's case will also have a significant impact on policies related to the rights of the Black community in other areas such as education, healthcare, and employment. Changing policies on civil rights and protecting equality will be crucial in reducing racial discrimination and creating a fair environment for all. The government and authorities will need to create more fair and transparent policies when dealing with racial discrimination cases, while also establishing public channels for citizens to share their opinions and report the injustices they face. The key lesson we can draw from Judge Carter's case is the necessity of acknowledging and acting on injustices within the legal and police systems. This story has exposed the deep-rooted issues the Black community faces every day and is also a reminder of the basic rights of citizens regardless of who they are and their social status. Furthermore, this story is a testament to the power of unity and courage in the fight for justice for a truly fair legal system for all. Thus, we cannot let events like Judge Carter's become an isolated personal battle, but must understand that it is an ongoing fight to protect justice and human dignity for everyone. The next part of the story will continue to explore the specific reforms taking place within the U.S. police and legal systems and the profound impacts these changes will bring to society in the future. When the story of Judge Carter and Officer James Turner is revealed, it is not just a simple case of police misconduct. It is a symbolic story of deep-rooted racial discrimination, the obstruction of justice and human rights within the U.S. legal system. This case is a powerful reminder of the need to build a truly just system, one where no one is judged simply by the color of their skin. This is not just a lesson for an individual or a group of people, but for society as a whole about what we must do to achieve true justice for all. Judge Carter's story reflects a major issue in our society. Racial discrimination can exist even within the very institutions tasked with protecting justice. We, as citizens of a modern society, have fought relentlessly for the rights of individuals, but this case shows that even those with the highest status in society, such as the U.S., Supreme Court judge cannot escape discrimination based on their skin color. Officer Turner's actions not only harmed one man, but they also sparked a conversation about how we can change and reform a system that has existed for so long, but still harbors injustice. This story shows that justice cannot be blind if it only looks at someone's skin color, wealth, or social status. True justice must protect human rights, ensuring that no one is treated unfairly or deprived of their rights simply because of external factors. We need to build a society where every individual, regardless of who they are, can access justice in a fair and equal manner. And Judge Carter's case is proof that if we do not fight to change the system, discrimination will continue to exist. An important lesson from this case is the importance of challenging a system when it no longer serves justice and truth. While systems are designed to protect fairness, the reality is that they are not perfect and are easily exploited. Judge Carter's story shows that systems like these need to be constantly examined and challenged to ensure that citizens' rights are not violated. Every individual in society can play an important role in changing these systems. This does not mean that everyone must stand up and fight in specific cases like Judge Carter did, but a small action from each individual, whether it's speaking out in public discussions, participating in protests, or supporting those who are oppressed, can make a big difference. It is through dissent and reasonable resistance from individuals, communities, and organizations that positive changes in society will take place. Those who stand up for justice, no matter who they are, can help change the way society views and handles issues of racial discrimination and justice. Additionally, another crucial lesson this case provides is the need for solidarity in the fight for justice. To truly change an unjust system, we cannot do it alone. The combination of individuals, communities, and social organizations is key to creating a fairer society. Judge Carter's story is a clear testament to this. Without the support from his wife, Gabriella Carter, and people like Officer Kevin Matthews, Sarah Mitchell, or the protesters, this case might not have received the attention and change it needed. So how can we drive change? The answer lies within each individual in society. We need to continue engaging in public discussions, speaking out about existing issues, and most importantly, taking concrete actions to create change within the system. Participating in public discussions is a way to help people understand that issues of racial discrimination and fairness are not just problems of one group or community, but issues for society as a whole. These small actions can create significant impacts. For example, we can support reform policies within the police system, such as requiring police officers to undergo training on racial awareness and social justice. We can demand transparency and accountability in the investigation and handling of police-related cases. We can also support organizations and individuals fighting for the rights of the Black community and protecting those who face racial discrimination. Moreover, legal actions such as participating in lawsuits related to racial discrimination are also ways to make real changes in the justice system. Even small lawsuits can set important legal precedents that strengthen citizens' rights and serve as examples for future cases. Finally, real change comes from community solidarity. A society where everyone participates in the fight for justice for human rights will bring about sustainable and powerful changes. When people rise up and fight for core values such as equality and justice, society will no longer be divided by prejudice and discrimination. Judge Carter's story, from being unjustly treated by the police to the case being brought to light, serves as a powerful reminder of the need for justice and equality in society. Individuals like Judge Carter, Gabriella Carter, and all those who stand up for justice are models of what we as a society must do to move toward a fairer future. This case is not just an isolated event, but a significant milestone in changing the mindset and policies of American society regarding racism, justice, and human rights. Each of us as individuals can contribute to this process. To create a fair society where everyone is treated equally, regardless of race or social status, we must continue to act, discuss, and fight for change. Every small action we take will contribute to a larger transformation in the future. But the question here is, if even the most powerful people in society, like Judge Carter, cannot escape racial discrimination, who among us is truly safe if the justice system can fail? Even those at the top, can we trust a system where so many are left behind? Leave your thoughts below this video And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story is just beginning.